They don't come with warning labels. They don't announce themselves. They don't arrive wearing the obvious masks of cruelty or malice. In fact, the most genuinely destructive people in your life are often the ones who seemed, at first, like exactly the kind of person you had been looking for. A supportive colleague, a caring friend, an attentive partner, someone who, in the early days, made you feel seen in a way most people never had. And then, slowly, so slowly you barely notice it happening, something begins to shift. You start second-guessing yourself more than you used to. Your energy feels lower after time spent with them. You catch yourself editing your words before you speak, measuring the emotional temperature of the room, adjusting your behavior to avoid a reaction you cannot always predict. You feel smaller in their presence than you did before you met them. That is not an accident. The Stoics were deeply practical about the nature of human character. They did not moralize about evil in abstract terms. They observed behavior, consistently, carefully, over time, and drew their conclusions from what people did, not what they claimed to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote not to waste time discussing what a good person should be, but to simply be one, and to recognize those who are not. This video is about recognition, not paranoia, not judgment of strangers on the street. Recognition of patterns that, once you can name them, lose most of their power to manipulate you. Here are 10 signs, each one subtle on its own. Together, they form a picture you will not be able to unsee. Sign 1. Constant manipulation, the reality distortion field. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending significant time around a manipulative person. It is not the exhaustion of physical labor or even the exhaustion of difficult, honest work. It is the exhaustion of never quite being able to trust your own perception of events. Manipulation at its most sophisticated does not feel like manipulation. It feels like care, like guidance, like someone who uniquely understands you and wants to help. Here is how it actually operates. A manipulative person first makes you feel seen and valued, more seen than others have made you feel. This creates a sense of debt and dependency. You begin to feel that their presence in your life is a gift. And once that dynamic is established, the conditions begin to attach themselves. Think about the colleague who praised your work lavishly in public while quietly undermining it to management in private. The friend who built you up in person while planting seeds of doubt behind your back. The partner who made you feel chosen and special, and then used that feeling as leverage whenever they needed something. Seneca observed that those who wear many faces also carry many hidden agendas. The manipulative person is not interested in your growth. They are interested in your dependency. There is a critical difference between someone who leads you toward greater autonomy and someone who keeps you tethered to their guidance. The clearest diagnostic question you can ask is this: does this person's influence make me more confident and independent over time, or less? Healthy mentors, friends, and partners want you to outgrow your need for them. They celebrate your independence. The manipulator subtly fears it, because your independence reduces their leverage. They will, often unconsciously, work to keep you in a state of self-doubt precisely calibrated to keep you returning to them for direction. When you notice this pattern, you do not need to confront it dramatically. You simply need to stop participating in it. Reclaim your own judgment. Make decisions without seeking their approval. Watch their reaction carefully. It will tell you everything. Sign 2. Charm as a weapon, the attractive facade. There is nothing wrong with charm. Warmth, wit, and the ability to make people feel at ease are genuinely positive qualities. Most people who possess them use them generously and without ulterior motive. But in the hands of someone with deliberately self-serving intentions, charm becomes a tool of precision. Not a natural expression of warmth, a performance of it, calibrated to produce a specific outcome in the observer. The difference between genuine warmth and weaponized charm is difficult to articulate, but not difficult to feel, if you slow down enough to notice. Genuine warmth is consistent. It is present when there is nothing to gain. It is directed as readily toward the person who can offer nothing as toward the one who can offer everything. Weaponized charm, on the other hand, has a pattern of targeted application. It appears most intensely when the person wants something: your loyalty, your resources, your advocacy, your silence. It fades with notable reliability once what was wanted has been obtained, or when the person offering it has decided you no longer serve a useful purpose. I once knew someone who had a remarkable ability to make every person in a room feel like the most important person there. The praise was specific and beautifully delivered. People left his presence feeling genuinely lifted. And then, with a predictability that only becomes visible in retrospect, the same people would find themselves doing things for him they would never have done otherwise, covering for him, advocating for him, remaining loyal long after the relationship had become entirely one-sided. Epictetus taught that the soul gradually becomes accustomed to the colors it is dipped in. Spend enough time in the presence of someone whose warmth is performed rather than genuine, and your sense of what genuine connection feels like gets recalibrated downward. The protective question: how does this person treat people who can offer them nothing? Watch the waiter. Watch the junior colleague. Watch how they speak about former friends once the relationship has cooled. You will find the truth there. Sign 3. Lies without conscience, the architecture of deception. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing should be done if it is not right, and nothing said that is not true. For most people, this is an aspiration, something they fall short of occasionally and feel genuine discomfort about when they do. That discomfort is important. It is the signal that their conscience is functioning. What distinguishes genuinely destructive people is not that they lie. Most people lie sometimes, but that they lie without the discomfort that normally follows. The lie does not cost them anything internally. It is simply another instrument in the toolkit. And lies of this kind are not random. They are purposeful. They are constructed to gain power, to evade responsibility, to control your perception of reality, or to undermine your trust in your own memory and judgment. There is a clinical term for this last category: gaslighting. The word has been overused in popular culture to the point of imprecision, but the underlying phenomenon is real and genuinely disorienting. When someone consistently contradicts your memory of events, implies your perception is unreliable, or reconstructs situations in ways that always happen to cast them in a favorable light, they are not correcting you. They are eroding you. The most important thing to understand about lies without conscience is that they require constant maintenance. Truth is self-sustaining. A lie, by contrast, requires a growing architecture of supporting lies. The inconsistencies accumulate. Dates do not match. Details shift between retellings. Stories that were presented as first-hand accounts are later attributed to someone else. Pay attention to these inconsistencies rather than excusing them. A single inconsistency is human. A pattern of inconsistencies is information. When you suspect this pattern, document. Not obsessively, but practically. Verify claims when you can. And ask yourself whether this person's version of events consistently positions them as the reasonable party and you, or others, as the problem. That narrative consistency is itself a red flag. Sign 4. Absence of empathy, the hollow interior. Human beings are designed for connection. Our nervous systems are literally built with circuitry dedicated to feeling what others feel, what neuroscientists call mirror neurons, what the rest of us simply call empathy. It is not a moral achievement. It is a biological foundation. When a person consistently lacks access to this foundation, something very specific happens in their relationships. They become extractive. Not necessarily because they choose to be cruel, but because without empathy, other people are not fully real to them. Other people's pain does not register as something to respond to, only as information to be used or ignored depending on its utility. This manifests in ways that are sometimes glaring and sometimes impossibly subtle. Glaring. You share something painful and they immediately redirect to their own experience. Not once, as a pattern. Every time you bring vulnerability, the conversation returns to them within minutes. Subtle. They are present and attentive when your emotional state is useful to them, when your distress makes them feel needed, when your gratitude validates them, when your loyalty serves a purpose. But the moment your emotional experience becomes inconvenient or demands something from them, a blankness appears. Marcus Aurelius wrote to stop debating what a good person should be and simply be one. But he also understood that you cannot manufacture empathy in someone who does not have access to it. You cannot explain your pain until they feel it. You cannot reason your way into their compassion. What you can do is stop organizing your life around the hope that they will eventually understand. Choose relationships with people who do not require a presentation of evidence before they can acknowledge your humanity. The bar is not high. Do not negotiate it downward because someone charming has convinced you that your standards are too demanding. Sign 5. The need for total control, the invisible cage. Control, in the context of genuinely toxic relationships, rarely announces itself as control. It arrives in the language of concern, of guidance, of "I'm just trying to help you." The person who needs to control you will not say, "I cannot tolerate your independence." They will say, "I'm worried about your decision. I just think you deserve better than that. I don't think those people are really good for you. Are you sure you can trust yourself on this?" Each statement, taken alone, could be genuine concern. In a pattern, it is something else. The key distinction between someone who genuinely has your interests at heart and someone who needs to control you is what happens when you ignore their advice. A caring person might express disappointment and then accept your autonomy. A controlling person escalates, becomes wounded, becomes distant, becomes punishing in subtle ways that make the cost of independence feel higher than the cost of compliance. Over time, this creates a very specific kind of internal damage. You begin to doubt your judgment before you have even exercised it. You preemptively seek their approval. You find yourself editing your plans, your friendships, your ambitions to fit within the parameters that keep the peace. Epictetus said that freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and that it comes from refusing to be controlled by what lies beyond our genuine sphere of influence. The controlling person knows this intuitively and works against it. They want your mental territory, not your body, not your schedule, your mind. You reclaim it not through confrontation, but through quiet, consistent reassertion of your own judgment. Make one decision without seeking their approval. Then another. Notice the response. Let the response tell you what this relationship actually is. Sign 6. The perpetual victim, the blame architect. There are people in the world who have genuinely suffered unjustly and carry wounds that deserve compassion. This is not about them. This is about a specific and distinct pattern. The person for whom victimhood is not a circumstance, but a strategy. The person who has discovered, usually through years of unconscious trial and error, that casting themselves as the wrong party reliably produces sympathy, deflects accountability, and shifts the burden of difficult situations onto others. The tell is the consistency. In a genuine victim story, sometimes they bear responsibility and sometimes they don't. In the perpetual victim story, the pattern is always the same. They are wronged, circumstances are to blame, other people failed them, and they are left to suffer the consequences of forces entirely outside their control. When something goes wrong in a project they were part of, it was poor planning by others. When a relationship fails, they were mistreated and misunderstood. When they cause hurt, the other person is too sensitive or deliberately misinterpreted them. Seneca noted that the truth stands on its own without justification, while lies always require elaborate supporting structures. The blame architect is always building, always adding complexity, always finding the angle that returns to their fundamental innocence. The Stoic response is not to argue with the narrative. It is to observe it, to make decisions based on what you see rather than what you are told, to hold them to the same standard of accountability you would hold anyone, and to notice, very clearly, whether they can meet it. Sign 7. Pleasure in others' pain, the joy of suffering. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable sign on this list, because it is the one most people resist believing. Most of us want to assume that cruelty requires obvious intent, that someone who enjoys watching others suffer would announce that enjoyment. In reality, this quality is almost always disguised, sometimes as humor, sometimes as a kind of detached, ironic commentary on other people's misfortune, sometimes as a subtle inability to conceal the slight upturn at the corner of the mouth when someone else stumbles. You know this feeling when you encounter it, the slightly off quality of their response to your failure, the almost imperceptible relief when something goes wrong for you, the way they seem slightly more alive in conversations about others' difficulties than in conversations about others' success. This behavior is not strength. It is not sophistication. It is, as Seneca observed, the clearest possible signal of deep internal poverty. A person who must diminish others to feel adequate is someone for whom genuine achievement is not accessible. The easier path is to pull others down to where they are. The protective action is simply to notice it and to stop bringing your vulnerabilities into contact with it. You do not need to call it out. You do not need to explain. You simply stop providing the raw material their pattern requires. Sign 8. Isolation as a tactic, cutting the roots. A tree cut off from its root system does not fall immediately. It continues to look healthy for some time. But it is already dying because it has been separated from its source of strength. Genuinely toxic people often understand this intuitively. They do not usually attack your support systems directly. That would be too obvious, too easily named. Instead, they work on them indirectly, planting seeds of doubt, making subtle comments about your friend's motives or your family's understanding, creating situations that require you to choose between them and others, rewarding your isolation with their warmth and punishing your connection to others with their coldness. The goal is not to be your primary relationship. The goal is to be your only relationship, because isolation is the condition under which control becomes total. I have watched this happen in friendships, in romantic relationships, in professional mentorships that quietly became something else. The person being isolated rarely notices it happening in real time. They notice it months later, when they reach for the support network they used to have and find it thinner than they remembered. Epictetus taught that we are not isolated creatures. We are built for genuine community. And genuine community is precisely what the isolating person fears, because genuine community gives you perspective, and perspective breaks the spell. If you notice that a relationship consistently pulls you away from other people who love you, pay attention to that direction. Healthy relationships expand your world. Toxic ones contract it. Sign 9. Jealousy disguised as advice, the subtle saboteur. This is the sign most easily missed because it arrives wearing the most convincing mask, genuine concern for your well-being. You share an achievement, something you worked hard for, something you are genuinely proud of. And instead of straightforward celebration, you receive something more complicated. That's great, but are you sure you're not overextending yourself? I just want to make sure you're thinking this through. I heard someone else tried something similar and ran into trouble. Each statement sounds reasonable, but notice the direction of energy. Genuine celebration lifts. This pulls down. Even gently, even with a concerned expression, even with plausible deniability, it pulls down. The envious person's fundamental problem is that your success makes visible something they have not achieved and cannot immediately access. Your growth is not just good news. It is an uncomfortable data point about the gap between where they are and where they want to be. The easiest solution is not to close that gap through their own effort. The easiest solution is to reduce the size of your success in their own mind and in yours. Stoic philosophy teaches us to trust our intuition about the emotional quality of interactions. Not to be paranoid, but to notice what a person's words do to us rather than simply what they say. If advice consistently makes you feel smaller rather than more capable, it is not advice. It is management. Surround yourself with people whose success makes you want to rise and whose response to your success makes you feel genuinely seen. That combination is rare and precious. Do not dilute it. Sign 10. Unrepentant, the refusal to grow. Every person of character has, at some point, caused harm they did not intend, behaved in ways they later recognized as wrong, and had to face the discomfort of genuine accountability. What they did with that discomfort is what separates them from those who remain genuinely dangerous. The capacity for genuine remorse, not the performance of it, but the actual internal experience of having caused harm and wanting to repair it, is one of the most reliable indicators of character. It requires the ability to hold two things simultaneously: your own dignity and the reality of your impact on another person. The person who cannot do this, who meets accountability with deflection, who meets apology with counteraccusation, who treats every attempt to address harm as an attack to be repelled, is not simply stubborn or proud. They have removed themselves from the possibility of genuine relationship. Because genuine relationship requires the mutual acknowledgement that we can hurt each other, and the willingness to address it when we do. Marcus Aurelius returned daily to the examination of his own faults. Not as self-punishment, but as self-respect. The understanding that growth requires honest assessment, that strength includes the willingness to be wrong, that the person who never admits error has simply stopped learning. The unrepentant person has not stopped learning by accident. They have stopped because learning requires the kind of vulnerability they are not willing to experience. Everything that looks like strength in them, the certainty, the deflection, the refusal to yield, is actually a defense against the terrifying possibility of being genuinely seen and found imperfect. You cannot fix this. You can only decide how much of your life you are willing to build around a person who will never acknowledge having hurt you, no matter how clearly they have. Final words. Awareness is the beginning of protection. These 10 signs do not form a judgment. They form a map. Most people who exhibit some of these patterns are not cartoonish villains. Many of them are people who were hurt in ways that shaped their behavior and who have never found the capacity or the environment to do things differently. Understanding this makes compassion possible without making it mandatory. You are allowed to compassionately recognize that someone developed these patterns in pain and decide that you do not have the resources or the obligation to be the environment in which they heal. The Stoic principle is simple and consistent. You cannot control what others do. You can control who you allow into your inner world, how much access they have to your time and energy, and what you do with what you observe. Awareness does not make you cynical. It makes you discerning. And discernment, the ability to distinguish between what genuinely serves your growth and what quietly consumes it, is one of the most important skills a human being can develop. Guard your mind. Choose your people carefully. And remember that the quality of your inner life is, more than almost anything else, determined by whom you allow to influence it. Which of these 10 signs have you encountered? Name it in the comments, without naming the person. Just a pattern. The people reading will recognize it immediately.